Hello, good evening and welcome to the second episode in the new era of the eFootball podcast. Again, I'm the host, Dan Tracy. I'm at the bare bones this week. I've got just one guest, but he's a great guest, and it's last week's not Everton and Republic of Ireland midfielder, James McCarthy. James, how are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm never going to let that name down, I don't think. But yeah, I'm good, mate.
Basically,
how are you?
I'm all good. I'm going to use that gag every week you're on the show. So, listeners, you're going to have to learn to love it because we're sticking with it. I'm great. I guess I need to ask you the most pertinent question, which is, as always, have you watched any football in the last 7 days?
Probably too much, mate. Yeah, I mean, I've got a heap of work on in a minute. But yeah, probably watched too much football.
James, there's never too much football, unless you sort of perhaps fail some exams further down the line, but that's something you need to worry. But in the sense of the podcast, too much football is exactly what we need. So we'll kick off with Leicester-Liverpool, which was Monday night's action. And James, I bet you're thinking like myself, where on earth did that performance come from?
Mate, well, you're telling me, mate. I had a cheeky bet, and I thought it was going to go Liverpool's way. I think most people thought it was going to go Liverpool's way. I think you've seen the attacking talent that Liverpool have shown this year. They've shown that they can score goals for fun. They've got players who can chop and change in between positions, and Leicester have got quite the opposite. They haven't turned up. They've seen their own manager sacked, and they went out at home with a caretaker manager. No one really fancied them at all, and I think maybe that probably suits Leicester a little bit, is going into games as underdogs. If they go into games as favourites, then they don't play their way, but when they go in as underdogs, no one expecting anything of them. That's when they turn up. Players like Vardy were back to their best last night. Even players like Wes Morgan, who have looked like they haven't been interested, were back in the form that saw them win the Premier League last year.
I think you've got to also say that Liverpool were quite bad last night, so it's hard to sort of draw the line to say how good Leicester were, which they were very good, and how bad Liverpool were, because you look at Liverpool's defence of Matip and Lucas, and you're sort of thinking, from a Leicester point of view, hang on, we could actually get something out of this. And I think Leicester, they sort of reverted to type of last season. They almost, in a sense, simplified their tactics. And I know that a lot of people have been saying, well, perhaps Ranieri overcomplicated it in terms of what he was trying to do this season. Do you think Shakespeare did that? Just literally said, let's just go back to the 2016 edition and see what we can get tonight?
I'm not too sure, because when I saw the Leicester team announced, I had a click on the link on Twitter, and I saw that most of the fans were saying, what's the point in sacking the manager and playing exactly the same team? And so, I mean, it must have been a change in mentality. It can't have been a change in tactics, because, you know, Ranieri was working with the same players at the end of the day. I said on the pod last week, Ranieri was always going to struggle when they lost Kante, because he's obviously such a player. And when you lose a player like that, it's inevitably going to affect the team. But I genuinely think it must have been a change in mentality, because he picked the same team. But I'd say they looked like a completely different team. They looked completely reinvigorated. But whether that was because of the manager, or whether they were just so relieved to have Ranieri out. I know that some of the players seemed really against Ranieri in the end. I think it was 4 players who went to the chairman and pretty much asked for him to be sacked. But they looked completely different last night. And you are right, Liverpool did look terrible. But I don't think you can blame their back four, because James Milner's played at left back all season. Lucas has played at centre half for a lot of the year, and I'm fairly certain it was the same back four that played fairly well against Tottenham when they beat us the other day.
Yeah, that is a good point, to be fair. Does that perhaps, though, highlight Liverpool's lack of squad, and will that be their Achilles heel in the race for 4th place, do you reckon? Or the top 4, shall I say?
Yeah, I mean, they've got excellent squad depth, but probably just not in the right places. You know, they've got some decent strikers. They've got lads who can score goals. They've got Lallana, Firmino, Sturridge, Coutinho, the like. But then when you're looking at the back, you know, when you see players like Ragnar Klavan playing a lot of minutes this season, you wouldn't really expect that in a top side. And then seeing Lucas Leiva roped in as a centre half, I suppose they could never have seen that Mamadou Sakho escapade where he, you know, being ruled out or being taken out of the equation. So it's definitely someone that they'll look to strengthen, someone that they probably should have strengthened in the winter transfer window. But as we know, it's not easy to sign players halfway through a season. But yeah, definitely going into summer, it'll be something they can look at, and it might come back to bite them as the fixtures become thick and fast towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I guess to a certain degree, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but do you think Jurgen Klopp will regret not adding to the defensive personnel in the winter transfer window?
I mean, you can say that when you've seen Lucas's performance last night, but then again, if you look at Lucas's performance when he played against Harry Kane at Anfield, you'd say there's no problems. It's the age old, when everything's going right, nobody complains, but then when things go wrong, people point the finger. When things have gone wrong with Spurs, we've pointed the finger and said, I've done this differently. But then again, if things had all gone right, then we'd have hailed the manager as a legend, as a tactical genius,
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point you make there, James. And I guess if we go back to Leicester, how much of that is a coincidence that they've shed Ranieri and they've all of a sudden found this performance? I mean, if he was watching at home, he must be thinking, hang on, these are exactly the same players. So is that literally a case of, right, we didn't fancy it under Ranieri, but we do fancy it now? Or is it just a coincidence? I mean, how much of that can be down to the fact they sacked their manager and they're now working under Craig Shakespeare? Was it literally he lost the players and there was almost a mutiny on their hands?
I think only time will tell, really, because this is just one game. We've seen teams fluke results against other teams all season, but it would appear that is it. But it is only one game. When we can judge them on this one game all we like, but next week they could go and lose 5-0, and we'd say we'll bring back Ranieri. But looking at it from a perspective of someone who watched the game last night, it does really look like the players. Ranieri had lost the players. Just sometimes you need a bit of a change up, a bit of a shake up, and that's what they've got by sacking the manager. And it's just a shame that it's come in such circumstances. I have to say, I mean, I said it on the pod last week. I agreed with the sacking of Ranieri because it wasn't working. No matter how many Premier Leagues you've won in the past, if you're now fighting for relegation, it doesn't matter, Well, how good is a Premier League winners medal when you're sitting mid-table in the Championship? And so Ranieri clearly he was clearly getting something wrong, something needed to be done. And since that's happened, and that seems to have happened, and the results have turned up, whether it's just a fluke against Liverpool or not, time will tell, won't it?
Yeah, I mean, to sort of use a cliche, there was obviously the new manager bounce last night, so that could be a result in isolation, as you say. They could go and lose the next 2 or 3, and everyone will think, well, that's not a particularly good decision. It's a bold decision from the Leicester club owners. I think it shows that loyalty in football is almost sort of dead, really. The fact that winning a Premier League is great, but the fact that staying in the Premier League is worth so much more. It's irrelevant of what you've done the season before. If you're 16th, 17th, 18th, and you're in real danger of getting relegated, then everything's forgotten and you're sort of judged in that time frame. So is it a good thing for English football? Probably not. Is it a good decision? I guess we'll only find out come May. But it's certainly not dull at Leicester again. They've obviously started their season in February, but probably started it a bit too late. The objective for them is simply for them to stay up. But it'll be interesting to see if they do stay up, whether Craig Shakespeare is the man to get the job full time. Is that something that you can see happening, or do you reckon they'll go for someone like Roberto Mancini or Gus Hiddink, for example?
I think they'll give it a few games first, and as I say, I think we can't really judge what's happening at Leicester on what happened against Liverpool last night. I mean, it could have just been a fluke, or it could have been a complete turnaround in the tactics. It could have been a complete turnaround in mentality, and in that case, Shakespeare deserves a go. But I mean, I think the man who's being talked about most prominently is Nigel Pearson, a man who they sacked before they won the Premier League. So I mean, you'd like to think that would be viewed as a step backwards.
Well, it'd be incredible. Well, for a club to go full circle like that, what a roller coaster 3 seasons that would be. I mean, that would be incredible. I mean, could you imagine Craig Shakespeare winning the Champions League with Leicester? We all said last season that Leicester could never win the Premier League. Stranger things could still happen again. So, I mean, nothing is impossible with this club, and nothing sort of tends to surprise you anymore. But I think that's enough for Leicester. I think we've covered everything that's sort of already been said in the past week. It's still up for debate whether it's the right decision or not, and like I say, we'll find out in May. But if we move on to the EFL Cup final, it was probably one of the classic finals from memory. There was a decent encounter on Sunday, 5-goal thriller. Do you think the right team won in the end?
Yeah, I do, to be honest, and I hate to say I called it, but I really did call it. The big game players of Man United did really step up in the end, and just the painful inevitability of how that game ended. It made literally everyone look at their Sky Bet app or their whatever betting app they use and think, why did I not put money on that? Because it was just so obvious that it was going to happen. You have to take your hats off to Southampton, and Gabbiadini, who looks a real prospect. He looks a real deal, and I have to say, like, I'm kicking us for not looking at someone like him, us being Spurs, for not looking at someone like him, when he's scoring goals like that for Southampton, because he did bag a hat-trick if you think about it. But no, Man United's big game players, namely Zlatan Ibrahimovic, really did step up in the end, and yeah, it was inevitable what was going to happen. As soon as that ball left Ander Herrera's foot in the last 10 minutes, it was only finding one person, and then it was only finding one goal.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing, you can't take anything away from Zlatan's performance. Unfortunately, the final will be defined by that offside call, that incorrect offside call. It's tough on Southampton because the way they sort of come back into the game, and not only that, if that goal stands, it's a completely different complexion to the game. Claude Puel says after the game in the press conference that he would like to see video technology for offside calls. Now, is that something that you would like to see, James?
No. I mean, but I think that's probably taking it a bit too far. I mean, I'm a fan of a fast game, and at current the goal line technology. The referee's got that watch on. It's something that can be decided in an instant. It's a did it cross the line or didn't it cross the line? It can be decided by a machine. It can be it flashes up on the referee's watch straight away. But something like offside is quite dubious. It'll take time to look over. And then how far do we stop that? How far back do we take the play if there was a handball 5 minutes before? If there was a foul 30 yards away off the ball, how far do we take it? And I just think I prefer watching a faster, slicker game. And if we're slowing the game down with all these decisions, then I think that'd be in jeopardy. And so no, I wouldn't like to see it for offsides. I like the goal line decision. I think the system is really good, and it clearly works very well. I don't know if you saw the PSV game where the goalkeeper accidentally took it into his own net, and it was literally centimetres over the line, but and it clearly works very well, and I do enjoy seeing it in England. But anything more major than that, I think you're going to slow the game down, and that's not what we want to see.
Yeah, I think you're right in this. The fact that with goal line technology, it's an absolute answer. It is yes or no. Whereas if you start going for offsides, I think you're then going to start to open Pandora's box, really. And that in itself, the fact that offside is still subjective, isn't it? You can look at so many different angles, and you're never going to get the right answer all of the time. In showpiece finals, there's no real excuse for not getting that right. I mean, it's a bad call, and it's incredibly harsh on Southampton, but these things do happen in football with offside calls. So if you start going down that route, like you say, Premier League's sort of sold on this all-out attacking, flair, gung-ho style of play. If you strip that back, you've lost sort of the main selling point. So you can see where Claude Puel's coming from. It's going to sort of be a sore point for weeks, months to come, but I don't think it's the right call, like on Sunday was. So I think United were, I don't know, the way they sort of went 2-0 up was almost against the run of play, really. I don't think being 2-0 up after 40 minutes, they didn't really deserve it, and I think a lot of people at that point would have probably thought, I don't know what, I think this game's done. But thankfully, I think for certainly the neutrals, Gabbiadini got the goal before half-time, and it sort of made the game a bit more alive, didn't it? And we certainly then picked up pace after the break. And I think you're right in Gabbiadini. From a Spurs point of view, it's almost the kind of Vincent Janssen that we wish we had, really. It sort of shows you what 14 million can get you. It's a sort of moot point because you think, if he was at Tottenham, perhaps he'd be better and score goals there. But then would he play the football at Tottenham because you've still got Harry Kane? So it's an incredibly hard sort of role to fill at Tottenham, especially with Harry Kane scoring a hat-trick at the weekend. Is that not almost like the poison chalice at Tottenham? Like, to be the backup striker is almost like the impossible role to have.
It is, yeah. I mean, there's never going to be a player, it's going to be very rare to find a player who is happy sitting on the bench and playing the odd Europa game. But us at Spurs, we moan when we rotate for the Europa League games anyway. And when you've got someone as young and fit and as Harry Kane, then he doesn't really need resting. Christian Eriksen's another example. The guy runs more than any other player in the Premier League, and yet we still see him in the Europa League and in the Cups. We very rarely throw out a completely different 11. And so you're right, someone like Gabbiadini probably looks at Spurs and thinks, there's not a place for me there. I want to be number one. And he's gone to Southampton. He's only been there a month, and he's got that number 9 shirt for himself. He's playing week in, week out. He's their talisman. He's already the man that they look at.
Yeah, I mean,
to pull up, to use a bit of brilliance, which he did at Wembley. You have to say, I mean, that second finish was absolutely glorious.
Yeah, that was a great instinctive finish, and just the way he sort of hit the ground running, I think it's certainly what Southampton have lacked this season. They've been tight at the back, especially in the first half of the season when Van Dijk and Font were the partnership. They've sort of gone a little bit south after the turn of the new year, but you did sort of wonder where the goals were going to come from, especially with Charlie Austin being out for 4 months. So yeah, to land Gabbiadini, it's been an incredible signing, and you think how long can this run go? And he's a real talent. I don't think it's going to really sort of turn Southampton's season around for the rest of the campaign. I think the best they can hope for is a top half finish, with it only being 2 points off of Stoke in 10th. But it certainly gives them hope and promise for next season, especially with this sort of constant conveyor belt of youth talent they have. But I guess for Southampton, the worry is, who could they lose, if anyone, in the summer? It's always that constant regeneration process with them, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they've been selling their best players to Liverpool for the last 3 years, and so I guess you'd like to think that the chairman and their backroom staff would turn around and say, it's time to stop selling our best talents. I think that's something that happened at Spurs not long ago, when Modric went and Bale went. We kind of, this time around, we've kind of turned around and said, we want to keep these players, because if we keep these players, then we're going to be challenging. And that's what Southampton need to be doing, really. I mean, I think at the time, it probably wasn't viable for them to keep players like Lovren and Lambert, Lallana, people like that. But, players like Gabbiadini, who, he seems very happy at Southampton. He came over, in the last 4 games, he's scored as many goals, if not more. And so there's no need for him to move on, and Southampton, as you rightly say, you need to start looking at next season, start building for the future, because, this season is probably a bit of a write-off for them. They're not gonna be challenging for Europe or anything of the like. You say a top 10 finish should be best case scenario for them. But they need to be thinking about where they want to be in the future. Set realistic targets. Europa League's probably a realistic target for them, or at least European competition. But players like Gabbiadini and the players who are coming through, I was really impressed with James Ward-Prowse. I thought he's a real talent. England under 21, I think he's a captain. And you're right. They do have this academy that manages to churn out young talents left, right, and centre, and hopefully they can start keeping them for their own and putting them towards their own causes rather than other clubs.
Absolutely, James. I think that wraps up the first segment nicely. I must do the social media bits, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get hold of us, and it makes the show a bit pointless. So here goes. If you want to follow us on Twitter or Instagram, it's @e_footballnet. If you want to do likewise on Facebook, it's facebook.com/efootballpage. You can check out the website, which is www.efootballonline.com. That'll give you all the latest football news and podcast episodes. As always, questions for the show, you can tweet at either @e_footballnet, so that's @e_footballnet, or you can tweet my personal Twitter account, which is @DanTracy1983. And if you just want to put #question, then I'll know to use that for the next show. I've got one question, so cheers for whoever sent that in. If we've got time, I'll read it out, but we're getting there slowly. It's a work in progress, but by all means, listeners, please give your questions in, because that means we can sort of it's got a good run of content for the next few episodes. But keep listening and keep your questions coming in. So that concludes the social media segment. Got the important bit out of the way. But let's now talk important business in the Premier League. I'll focus first on the bottom 7. Teams such as Bournemouth and Middlesbrough, we don't really talk about them in relegation crisis, but they seem to be being dragged closer and closer to the bottom 3. Bournemouth, for example, have won 1 in 10. Middlesbrough have not won a game in 9. Do these two teams have the biggest concern in terms of a relegation battle? The fact they're sinking like a stone, do you worry for them more than clubs in the bottom 3, such as, say, Palace or Hull?
Yeah, certainly, because if you're down there in the bottom 3, you think your main focus is to avoid relegation. You're playing up rather than playing down. You've seen it in past years where teams have escaped relegation by the skin of their teeth, and Sunderland have done it a few times in the last few years. West Brom did it most famously in my memory. And when you're on the way down, you're getting a bit wary. What if we could go down? but if you're very at the rock bottom of that table, all you can think of is we need to get out of this scrap. You try your very hardest to pull it out of the bag at the last minute, and stadiums start getting a bit more packed. I think Sunderland last year, or wherever they were, when they came very, very close to going down, they started packing out their stadium. The atmosphere there was amazing, and I think that kind of thing can contribute to rescuing teams. You're right, going from mid-table down, it's a slippery slope. You can find yourself in that bottom three fairly quick, but then again you can see yourself out of it just as quick. Swansea, before they brought in the new boss, they were right in the mix of it, but since then they've really turned around their fortunes a little bit, and they're looking in a bit better form, and they're now clear of the bottom three. So yeah, you're right. It's a bit of a form game. If you find yourself in a bit of form, you see yourself out of it fairly quickly. But if it's a slippery slope for teams like Bournemouth, who as you say haven't won a game in an awful long time now.
Yeah, I mean, if we take first Middlesbrough as an example, the fact they've scored 19 goals in this stage of the season, if you were to extend that ratio to the end of the season, they would have less than 30 goals. Now, do you think that in itself is relegation form?
Yeah, certainly. Like you can't win games without scoring goals, and that's a very Michael Owen comment. But it's true. You need someone in that team who's going to, a Gabbiadini type who's just going to pull you a goal out of nowhere. You thought it might have been Alvaro Negredo,
yeah.
But he hasn't quite been firing. Maybe that's because he hasn't got the service. But Middlesbrough has certainly got talent. They've got I watched Adama Traore when he was at Villa last season, and he showed glimpses of what he can do. Why he was at Barcelona to start with. He's a very good player. He's completed more take-ons than any other player in the Premier League. But something must be going wrong at Middlesbrough for them to be not getting the goals that they desperately need to win these games and see games off.
Yeah, because it's not a lack of options. Like you say, you got Negredo, Stuani, and then they've added in the winter transfer window Patrick Bamford and Rudy Gestede. Now, looking at those two names, you could probably say that Rudy Gestede, is he really the kind of man who's going to get you the goals to stay up? And also Patrick Bamford had a great spell at Middlesbrough before, but he has this sort of tendency to float round lower Premier League clubs and not really turn it on. So do you think that although it's added personnel, do you think they're really the kind of men that are going to be the ones to sort of provide the goals to keep them on the right side of the drop zone?
No, I can't say they are, to be honest. And Rudy Gestede is another lad that I watched at Villa last season, and he to me he's very last minute throw a man on to lump the balls up to. Villa were starting him in games, and so they were going into games with that kind of route one mentality. Middlesbrough will probably use him as that kind of target man for late on if they're still searching for that goal. And especially what you say about Patrick Bamford, no one can really say that Patrick Bamford is the prospect that he used to be, because he's been at these teams, he's been at Burnley, he's been all over the place, even that spell at Middlesbrough, and he hasn't really set the world on fire, hasn't nailed down a starting 11 place. It was Crystal Palace last time we saw him, and if he really was setting the world on fire, and he was putting the work in training, he was bagging in training, then the manager would turn around and reward him with a place in the starting 11. But that isn't what's happening. It frustrates me when we see players, people criticising managers for not playing players that he watches week in, week out, but we don't. But the easiest thing to do for us is to take it back to Spurs, and that is, why is the manager not throwing Vincent Janssen on? But the manager clearly hasn't seen enough from Vincent Janssen. So if he hasn't seen enough from Vincent Janssen, then why have we? We clutch at straws when things are going wrong. But Patrick Bamford must be another player like that. He's not setting the world alight, as you say. He's not getting the goals. He's not putting the effort in training. And he clearly hasn't got the talent that some people thought he had a few years ago.
Do you reckon he's in danger of becoming a bit of a busted flush?
Becoming a bit of a Josh McEachran, a player
great shout.
Who comes through, and they're a prospect for years on end, a prospect, and then they never really fulfil their potential. Maybe that's because he's young and English, and we big him up as the next big thing straight away. But really, if they haven't got it, then they haven't got it. And in my opinion, I don't think Patrick Bamford is the player that a lot of people thought he was.
Guess that could sort of give you a wider question as to, is that something to do with Chelsea's youth system and loan system, and the fact they farm out so many players? But that's sort of something I think we can say for another week, because that's, they've got so many players that they sort of seem to hoard, and is that the best thing for players of that age and talent? Do they need to then sort of play more football but moving to a big club, that's all sort of very well, and the sort of glamour that goes with it, I guess, the money and all that, but would they be better suited playing elsewhere and actually getting football? But I guess that's a question for another night. If we move on to Bournemouth, and the fact that they've lost their last 4, they've lost 5 from the last 7, I think personally they're only 4 points clear of the drop, and I think they could be in real trouble now. Do you think perhaps that in the summer they've stayed up and they're a bit excited with all this sort of influx of money they've got from a TV deal? Do you think perhaps buying the likes of Jordan Ibe for 15 million was not really the right kind of purchase that they should have made?
No, I think when you see clubs getting that kind of money, I suppose it's nice to see them reinvesting it into the side. And I know at the time the Bournemouth fans would have been very excited about the signing of Jordan Ibe. It's another one that just hasn't worked out. If Jordan Ibe comes into the team for 15 million and scores 10 goals and grabs a couple of assists, then you think, what a great signing. But he hasn't. Whether that's been through injury, whether that's because he's just not hitting the mark. You can't really, it's one of those. Managers aren't readers, chairmen aren't mind readers. They can't tell who's going to work out and who isn't. And if they hadn't reinvested that money into the team, then you'd have been questioning why they were even in the Premier League. I think the thing about Bournemouth is, looking back at their results, you can brush aside losses like a 2-0 loss to Man City and the like, but it's when they're losing games like at home to Crystal Palace that you need to start worrying. Drawing at home to Watford, shipping six goals to Everton, who have looked very uninspiring at some points this season. They're the kind of games where they need to be winning so that they can afford they're not going to beat Man City's, they're not going to beat the Chelsea's, they're not going to beat Tottenham, but these games at the bottom, at the foot of the table, your Watfords, your Crystal Palaces, the kind of games that they need to be turning around. They need to be asserting a bit of dominance that they just haven't really been doing. And I think Bournemouth is a team that I would be really worried about this season, certainly, yeah. Because
if you look at their form over the last 7 games, they've picked up just 2 points and they conceded 20 goals, which now means they've conceded 51 all season, and that is now the 2nd worst defensive record. Has the rot set in at Bournemouth, and what can Eddie Howe do to turn things around?
Yeah, I think it's the age-old mentality thing. They're in a bit of a rut at the minute. When you're losing games, it's easy to carry on losing games. And I think, as I say, that they need to be looking ahead at fixtures. They need to be looking ahead at games that they really should be picking up points. They've got Manchester United up next. That going to Old Trafford isn't an easy thing to do, and therefore that probably shouldn't be a game where they should be looking to get anything from. But games, they've got Swansea coming up. They've got Southampton coming up. Actually, I am looking at their fixtures right now, and they have got a bit of a tough run after that. And so games like West Ham, Swansea, Southampton, they really need to be picking up points, because after that they've got Liverpool, Chelsea, Tottenham. And you seriously worry about them when they've got Liverpool, Chelsea, Tottenham in a row. So they need to be looking ahead and thinking, look, these are the games we need to pick up points in, and if we don't pick up points in these games, then what hope have we got going to the big boys, really? Yeah,
they've almost got to now break up these last 12 games into sections and say, we can get a certain amount of points in this, and then a few more points here, and sort of almost stock up on the points now before they get into that run of big teams, because like you say, you do then worry as to where results are going to come from. And I guess, I don't know, in terms of, is it a coincidence that their form has nosedived since Nathan Ake has gone back to Chelsea? Has that one man not being a part of the team anymore had that much of an effect on their results, or is there like a wider issue at Bournemouth, do you reckon?
I don't think you can pin it all on one man's shoulders. I'm sure they've got someone in their ranks who can deputise for Ake very well, and Ake, he looks a very decent talent, but he doesn't look the kind of bloke who can hold up the entire team. He might well break through at Chelsea, but then again he might well not. They've got people like Kurt Zouma coming back, so I think someone like Nathan Ake isn't the kind of bloke to hold up an entire Bournemouth side, and so him going back can't have. It's going to affect the side. It's going to upset the balance. When you're playing someone else where you're used to Ake being, but not enough to send them into an absolute downward spiral. He wasn't that integral to the team all along, and so it must be a bit of a mentality thing. As I say, they're stuck in a rut. They just need that one result, that 3-3 result to Arsenal that perked them up a little. A result like that that's just gonna give them a bit of spark, and give them a bit of life, and give them a bit of fight to stay in the Premier League.
Okay, it's gun to the head time now. I know we've still got 12 games to go, but at this point of the season, who do you think will be the 3 teams that get relegated?
I am going to say Bournemouth, Hull and Middlesbrough.
All big shouts. Right, I'm going to make a note of these, and I'm going to ask other guests towards now the end of the season. So that's Bournemouth, Hull, did you say? And Middlesbrough.
Yeah.
Hull.
Yeah.
So you think Sunderland are going to beat the drop?
I do, mate. Yeah, I think they've got another one of those great escapes in them. What about you then, Dan? Who's going down for you?
If I had to pick, I would say Bournemouth, Sunderland and Middlesbrough. So I think Hull are going to get out of this because I like the way Marco Silva's turned the team around. I think they were quite unlucky on Saturday just to pick up a point with Burnley. Had they won that, they'd been 17th now, and Middlesbrough would be in the bottom three. I think Palace, that win might just sort of start things with their survival. I think
Sam Allardyce is a relegation avoiding expert, isn't he? So they've got a secret weapon up their sleeves there.
Absolutely. I think, if you ask Palace fans, it's not quite the run of results they would have wanted with him coming in, because they've almost in a sense got worse since getting rid of Pardew. But like I say, they have got the right man. It's taking perhaps longer than they expected. But I think that win will sort of finally give them a bit of momentum. They certainly need it. I think they had a win against Bournemouth, like you said, and it was almost a bit of a false dawn because then they lost 2 on the bounce. So I think they'll be all right. But like I say, so my 3 at this stage of the season are going to be Bournemouth, Sunderland and Middlesbrough. So we'll see who will be right coming in the season. And like I say, I'll add some more guests and we'll see who can be king of the relegation predictions come late May. So that's
interesting. We both think Leicester are going to stay up then.
Yeah, I think they will, to be honest, because I think they've done what they needed to do. Like I say, is it the right decision in terms of loyalty and the fact that man's won a league title? Perhaps not. If you're the club owners, is it the right decision because we're in the Premier League? Then if they do stay up, then of course it's the right decision, because all that TV money and all that revenue, unfortunately, is greater than loyalty in football. So it's not a nice thing to say, because we all sort of raise him with things such as Alex Ferguson and his great stint, Arsene Wenger, possibly 20 years, possibly more. We're never going to see that in football again, because the Premier League is just there's so much riding on staying in the top flight that, like I say, if you win a title and then you're sort of not defending it in the way you should be, then you could be shown the exit door. But yeah, that covers the bottom 7 for this week. I'm sure we'll touch on them in many more guises over the next sort of few months. I just want to touch on the top 4 quickly, or top 6. Not a lot of activity due to a sort of curtailed Premier League programme. Chelsea, once again, just in their own sort of world now, aren't they? 10 points clear, and you've got to really sort of say with 12 games to go, the title is theirs. Even the most optimistic fan of Tottenham, Manchester City, Arsenal, you just can't see it going anywhere else. But Tottenham fans have got optimism of their own after that impressive 4-0 win over Stoke. You'd almost sort of wish to play Stoke every week after the fact we've now battered them 4-0 3 times in a row, twice this season and once last April. Your views, James, on Sunday's performance?
I think it was absolutely brilliant. It was a really refreshing performance. I mean, it's not very often that we get to see Spurs comfortably brush a team aside. Even when it's a bottom 3 team coming to White Hart Lane, they usually make it difficult for us. But Stoke look absolutely all over the place. They really did look terrible, and they have the last 3 times we've played them. It was really good to see. Obviously Harry Kane bagging his hat trick, but I think more importantly for me was Dele Alli showing that little bit of fire in his belly. A little bit of a comeback to those who were criticising him after his red card in midweek. That was him saying, "Look, I'm going to make mistakes, but this is what I can do." And I thought he was just as brilliant as Kane. Eriksen, absolutely top form again, top assists in the Premier League, and really showing that he's our number 1 creative player. And so yeah, it was, and a clean sheet's gone on top of that. So yeah, it's really impressive to see, and really nice for us just to shrug a team aside once more.
Yeah, the thing that impressed me most about Dele Alli was the fact that he was obviously targeted by Mark Hughes after that Thursday, and I think the way that Charlie Adam and Glenn Whelan, like a bunch of cloggers, just got into him all afternoon, didn't they? He never took the bait, and I think that sort of showed the maturity that he might not have had last season. Case in point being when he gave Claudio Jacob an uppercut and then missed the tail end of the season. I think he sort of needed that performance, especially after Thursday, and I think we certainly reaped the benefits. The only sort of blot on the copybook would be perhaps Alderweireld coming off early in the second half. Do you think that's perhaps a precautionary measure for Everton on Sunday? Yeah,
definitely. I read afterwards that both Vertonghen and Alderweireld's substitutions were both, precautionary. They both asked to come off just in case. And when we're 4-0 up against Stoke, that's a loyalty that we can provide. It's a precaution that I'd rather them take. Because if we go into the next game without both of them, then we're a completely different team. But the way things are looking, we'll go into that next game with the 2 of them fit and ready, and that's exactly what we want.
Absolutely, and you touched on clean sheets and the fact that Spurs have a goal difference of plus 32. Now that in itself could almost be an extra point come the end of the season due to their such impressive goal difference. Do you think it could come down, that close between sort of 4th or 5th, or do you reckon Spurs will be higher than that come the end of the season? We won't necessarily have to be worrying about goal difference, because if you think about it really, 2nd and 4th now is pretty much the same prize because they all qualify for the Champions League direct. So do you think Spurs are going to finish sort of comfortably in the top 4, or do you reckon it's going to be last day drama again and we might have to rely on that goal difference?
But being a Spurs fan, I'd love to be able to say to you that I think we're going to finish 2nd comfortably this year, but I still think that there's the danger that we could finish 5th. But that's because I'm a Spurs fan. We could be falling up against Stoke in the last minute, and I'm still expecting them to draw 4-4. But yeah, no, you're right about that goal difference. That's also a sign of how far we've come. Because I remember the days we used to celebrate when we had a zero goal difference, when we had a +1. It was an absolute result. But plus 32 is it's absolutely fantastic. And if it really does come down to that at the end of the year, then we'll be thankful that we put that number of goals past teams like Stoke. And especially, I think it's even more important for a team like Spurs, for a fan base like Spurs, to finish ahead of Arsenal. Just one season would be really lovely. I know that we go on about this obsession that we've got with each other, but if we can for once finish above them, it would be really nice. It'd be something to treasure, and it would be testament to how far we've come as a club.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all runs have to come to an end at some point. Whether it's this season or not, I don't know. Whether that ties in perhaps with it possibly being Arsene Wenger's last season with Arsenal, who knows? I mean, we all thought it was going to be last season. We were sort of gunning for the title. That didn't quite work out, and then we all know how it panned out when we finished 3rd after losing to Newcastle 5-1 on the final day of the season. So nothing's for certain, is it? I'll take my Tottenham hat off, because I think for listeners of the show, they probably don't want to listen to us talking about Tottenham for the whole show. What I will touch on though is Stoke. The fact that they're 10th, I mean, they finished 9th for the last couple of seasons, so it's not too much of a drop off. But do you feel they've perhaps plateaued under Mark Hughes, or is he still doing a good job with what's available to him? Do they perhaps need a change of manager in the summer? I
think it would certainly be harsh to see Mark Hughes out of a job after the season they've had. They've had a very, very average season, But then again, Stoke, with the greatest of respect, they are an average team. But then when you see them, they've brought in some very talented players, but it just hasn't really worked out for them. I think the one that turned heads for me was Janelli Mbula when he came in to Stoke. I thought, well, that really is a player that it was a big money signing. It's not something that they've done before, and I thought, well, if they've managed to attract a player like that, then they must have a really good project going. Obviously, when you look at Stoke, you think of Arnautovic, Shaqiri, Boyan. Obviously, he's moved on now, but players like that you would not have associated with Stoke back in the day. You're still thinking of your Jonathan Walters and your Peter Crouch when you think about Stoke, but I think, as I say, it would be really harsh to see Mark Hughes out of a job, but someone who is much more willing to use the Arnautovic's, the Mbulas, the Boyan if he ever comes back from loan, rather than Mark Hughes is still loyal to people like Peter Crouch and Jonathan Walters and Ryan Shawcross. Someone who's willing to change it up a little bit, but then again, I suppose it's ingrained into Stoke as a club. I don't want to call them a Route 1 football team, but that's what they are. And if they can get out of that rut, then that would be really good for them, for them to become a proper footballing team. But I just can't see it happening anytime soon. Yeah,
I guess they're sort of stuck in between two camps, really, aren't they? Hughes has tried to soften their approach with the signings, like you mentioned, like Arnautovic, Bojan at the time, Shaqiri, and you could sort of see in his sort of first couple of years that it was trying to move away, not too quickly from what worked under Tony Pulis, but now he's almost sort of reverting to type a bit, really, and it's almost like a backward step. The evolution of Stoke has almost sort of stopped, and you do sort of wonder, with these sort of players ageing, if they're going to continue down that route, or will they then finally become unstuck? I mean, I'm not advocating they're going to get relegated this season, but do you not perhaps think if they don't keep the lifeblood of new players coming in, that they might then struggle next season, perhaps?
Yeah, but it's certainly. I mean, it's not all about signing players. I'm sure that they have got a strong academy system, but we haven't really seen too many youngsters come through the ranks at Stoke. But going back to the managerial situation, they could bring in a manager who tries to get them playing football, like proper football, and then they could start losing games. And then where do you go from there? Like you keep Mark Hughes, who's fairly middle of the road. It's not as bad as the Rory Delap days where it was literally hit and hope. But then again, it's still not great football. They're still playing these kind of players who are associated with that kind of game. But yeah, as I say, if they bring someone in who, a foreign manager, maybe someone who loves the beautiful game, and they try and play a style of football that isn't their style of football, then they could see themselves fall flat, to be honest. And I think, as I said, Mark Hughes would be very unlucky to see himself out of a job with the job that he's done at Stoke.
Yeah, I suppose is the grass green on the other side, really. They could go for sort of foreign ideas, but, would that manager then have the sort of experience of the Premier League? We've seen foreign managers coming before, like, Felix Magath at Fulham previously. That didn't really work. So, yeah, there's examples. And also you could look at Tony Pulis and with West Brom, and the fact that last season people were having the same kind of complaints where, it's pragmatic football, it keeps in the Premier League, but it's very sort of mundane to watch. And everyone felt that perhaps he would be the man to lose the sack race at the start of the season, especially with the club's new Chinese owners. But he's been rewarded with their sort of support. And look at them now, they're 8th. They're probably going to sort of be 8th come the end of the season. I'd be very surprised if they then didn't finish there. I don't think they can really sort of surpass Everton. But it sort of shows that if you do stick with your manager, then finally it can start to come good. They've not really changed too much at West Brom this season. They've sort of bought Nasser Chadli and Matty Phillips, which have been 2 incredibly good purchases. But what do you think of the job being carried out at the Hawthorns this season?
Yeah, no, I think it's very similar to the Stoke situation. However, they've kind of gone a bit further into that technical football kind of. You mentioned Nasser Chadli and especially Matty Phillips, who's really changed the way they've played. But when I worried when they brought in Solomon Rondon, is a big bloke who is a big powerful striker, and I thought, oh no, they're gonna go back to typical Tony Pulis, but to bring in the old fashioned football cliche, he's got good feet for a big man. The players, I really enjoy watching players like Chris Brunt and James Morrison. I think they're really, really technical players, and they've changed up their style of play. They're playing a much prettier game of football, and it's paying off for them. And I think Matty Phillips is the man who is testament to that. He's the man who kind of is their spark, and yeah. It's really good to see that it's worked out for them, and I think West Brom fans have been through quite a lot over the last few years, and I think they really deserve a bit of good news, and that's certainly what they've had this season. So it's really good to see. Yeah,
they've been certainly easier on the eye this season, haven't they? And I've quite actually enjoyed watching West Brom when they actually are on telly. They've been sort of a decent team to watch, actually, so kudos to them. I think that pretty much wraps up the Premier League. Do you know what? I don't really want to touch on the Europa League. I think they're sort of done and dusted now.
Yeah, Spurs are out. What time for this week?
Yeah, I've got my listener's question. It's from my friend Louis Flores. He's a massive fan of the show. He's obviously only listened to the last episode, but he comes in with this perler of a question. And James, as you're a Tottenham fan, I have to ask you this. Which Arsenal player would you take from their starting 11 and put into the Tottenham starting 11 in a like-for-like swap? So you couldn't obviously take a left-back for a centre midfielder. You have to take someone from Arsenal's first 11 and put them in Tottenham's first 11. Who would it be and why?
Oh God! Can I pack up and go home, please?
Well, do you know what? I was giving it some thought, and I'm not sort of saying, "Oh, I'm a Tottenham fan. Aren't Tottenham great?" But
no, if you think about it, position by position, it really is not. No, I mean, certainly not the back five. Certainly not the back five. Going into midfield, no, definitely not. No, and then I think would you swap Mesut Ozil for any of our creative trio? I don't think. Not at all, no. And then, do you rather have Alexis Sanchez and Harry Kane?
No. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean...
we're going to be criticised for looking at this through
Tottenham. Yeah, absolutely.
But honestly,
I didn't want this to be the case, but I think it's a really hard question for those two clubs, especially from an Arsenal to Tottenham way. I'm sure Arsenal fans would love to pick a Tottenham player. Maybe, I don't know, Danny Rose at left back. I'm just sort of picking one out. I don't know. But... from a Tottenham point of view, I think that's an incredibly hard question to answer. Maybe because the shape of the teams are slightly different as well, so they don't quite fit like for like in sort of midfield forward. But that's a great question, Louis Flores.
It's really Thank you. That's got me thinking. But yeah, as much as I am trying to think of one. I suppose there's people who would debate the Harry Kane, Alexis Sanchez debate, and people who would. Debate between Mesut Ozil and any of our creative 3 and creative 2. But But no, I have to say, I mean, if they're willing to swap Kieran Trippier for Alexis Sanchez, then yeah, I'd go for that. But other than that, no, I think I'll pass. Thank you.
Right, okay, so it's a pass, Louis. But thanks for the question, and do send in another one next week, please. I think that's about it then this week. I need to say a big shout out to the African football experts. You know who you are, so hello. Thanks for listening. James, more importantly, thanks for being my only guest this week. But it's been an absolute blast. I mean, we've run over time. Fourth officials put up loads of extra minutes, so don't worry about that. It's been a packed show, and there's still more we could have spoken about. So, James, been an absolute pleasure, mate.
My pleasure is mine, mate. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Again, if you want to get the questions into the show, you can either email me or just follow me if you want at DanTracy1983, and you can also follow and send the questions into at @e_footballnet. So, until next week, this is the eFootball Podcast. Thanks for listening. Good night.